So this is my review of the Nammatj 2 GT. It's a great tent. I've used it for a lot of years, and I think it's got a lot of great pros to it that make it an excellent tent for a variety of applications. So basically it's part of the black label that Hilleberg's put out. They're the strongest, most durable, and usually the heaviest tents that they make. So you can see here there's a few of them there, different designs. The Nammatj is notable for being probably the lightest out of that label, so they're a great compromise in terms of weight and strength. In terms of dimensions of the tent, it's quite a roomy tent inside, especially the vestibule, and the weight of the tent itself is around 3.15 kilograms just with the tent and the poles, no pegs, and with about 3.3 kilograms with the pegs. Now the pack size is a bit of an indication there, next to a Thermarest Z-Lite mat. So basically the tent's quite easy to set up, and that's probably one of the big things that drew me to the tent was setting it up in store and seeing how quick and easy and simple it was, and that you don't have to expose the inner to the elements whilst you're doing it. So it's a great tent in terms of being simplistic to use and very easy to set up under adverse conditions. So I really like that aspect of it, rather than just setting up an inner then putting an outer over the top of it. So I've used this tent in a lot of places, Colorado, in the mountains there, in Australia for climbing trips, just camping in campgrounds out of vehicles, ski touring, especially longer term expeditions where you're camping out for maybe a week and skiing around and using it as a base camp. Just general hiking, it's a great tent, especially if you're going with more than one person. And yeah, in the mountains for climbing or for any sort of expedition, it's a great tent to use. So yeah, I've used this tent for a lot of different things. I've used it in all seasons. Mostly, when I'm using it, it's usually with another person if I'm going to be using it for general use. So for a thing like camping on the beach or in the bush, in the mountains above and below tree line, it's been a great tent for all sorts of uses. So, regardless of season or terrain or weather, it's been fantastic. I'd also use it for solo or partnered base camping from a vehicle. So, going somewhere and you don't have much of a walk-in, you can just set up a fairly beefy tent and have the comfort and livability space that the Nammatj provides. That's when I'd use it, certainly. I'd also use it if I'm going solo and I'm using it for a long-term stay in a base camp, so maybe ski touring out of a mountain for maybe 5 or so days. I might take the Nammatj, especially if I know there might be some chance of bad weather along that journey. So I'll definitely be taking the Nammatj as a base camp tent to set up in winter, just to live out of it in a better fashion. Some of the pros of this tent, well, as you can see, it's pretty easy to set up. So I set up other tents in stores over the time and played around with other tents, and yeah, just the Nammatj and just generally the Hillebergs in general, in fact, all have the capacity where you erect the outside of the tent and the inner is attached. So I know some other tents have that capacity, other brands, but the Hilleberg have made it a feature of their design. It's just so simple and easy to set up. You can't really go back to something else. There's excellent living space, and especially for gear. So if you're doing anything like climbing or ski touring and you're going with a fair bit of gear, especially as two people, you're going to use a fair bit of space. And having that livability and that capacity to live in a tent for a long duration, especially in a storm or anything like that, is a great feature of the Nammatj, because that vestibule is so good that it gives you so much room to be able to cook and look after yourself in adverse conditions. Speaking of the vestibule, it's so big, it's so roomy. You can sit up in it on a camp chair. You can dig it out for in snow winter conditions to create even more room. But it's so great to have that at the end of the day and be able to spread yourself out, and especially as two people again with a fair bit of gear, you can just spread out and even live in separate areas of the tent just to give yourselves a bit more space as well if you need to. The other great thing about the tent is the ventilation. So there's vents at both ends of the tent, and you've got the mesh inner door as well that you can open up to allow more air to pass through the tent. And it doesn't really get a lot of condensation, especially for what it is, which is a pretty beefy, durable 4-season tent. And in terms of durability, it's a fantastic tent. Like my tent is over 10 years old and it's been going strong. No issues, nothing's broken, nothing's torn. The poles, the pegs are all going strong still, and the fabric itself might have faded a bit, but certainly it's super strong and super capable still. In terms of the cons of this tent, it's probably the weight is the one thing that people bring up with this tent. So people bring up the fact that it is heavy, but to an extent that's true. But if you're looking at a tent that weighs 1.5 kilograms basically for two people, so 3 kilos roughly all up for two people. It's pretty amazing value given its 4 season and storm standing capabilities. Nice little additions to the tent include side storage pockets for phones and wallets and stuff. There's a line across the top of the inner to dry and hang things from. Floor space is quite large in terms of the inner. The actual vents you can see here are easily controlled and malleable. You've got a great door, so the actual door to the tent is very stormproof and easy to use and very durable. No problems there. These are the cups that support the poles, and they're quite great in regards to the ability to adjust them, so you can actually pull them tighter even when the tent's set up, so you can actually increase the tautness and strengthen your pitch. You can also do the same with the attachments at either end of the tent, so you can actually pull it tauter when it gets loaded or it feels a bit of wind. The other thing as well that's great about the tent is just that the guy lines are so ubiquitous, so you can actually peg it out whichever direction you're feeling the wind coming from. You can peg out all directions, or usually just enough is 2 or 3 of the guy lines into the wind. And also the base of the tent is super strong. Like, I've never used a footprint with this tent or even a protective sheet, and this photo shows you like the wear and tear after 10 years of use, and it's basically negligible. So fantastic tent to use for long-term use. So using this tent, yeah, the weight is a consideration, especially if you're going solo. But if you're going in partnered setup, it's definitely worthwhile. But there are lighter options out there. So, but again, they're not as durable and not as long lasting, and not as stormproof to the weather. So I wouldn't use this tent for solo lightweight things like ski touring. I've got lighter tents that I'd use just for maybe a weekend or so. But and just in general solo activities. So if you're going solo for hiking or even camping, you might not want to take a tent like this. You might want to take something a fair bit lighter. Would it be my only tent? If I could only have one tent, I probably would not buy a Nammatj, just because it is on the heavier side. So I'd rather something that compromises a bit of weight but still has a bit of strength. So I'd probably be looking at something like a Nalo, the 2, or maybe the GT version of that tent. It's a great tent, very strong, capable of winter, but not as heavy as a Nammatj. But if you can have more than one tent, why wouldn't you? So, if you're going to have more than one, the Nammatj makes a great base camp tent, especially for, more than one person. And an all-season tent, it's a fantastic tent for 2 people. So, if you are going out a lot with more than one person, it's a fantastic tent for every application. But if you're going out by yourself, things like, for example, an Anaris would make a great 3-season or, warmer weather hiking tent. And I use a direct to Mountain Hardware tent for winter solo stuff, because it has that capacity to be a lot lighter, but also, still have the room and the livability and the stormproofness that I need. That tent, though, is single wall, so it does have that compromise. So overall, this tent's been fantastic for me. Over 10 years of use, every possible application you can imagine. I think it's a great tent, and if you're after a tent that's 2-person capable, all season compatible and usable, I would definitely recommend the Nammatj. It will last you forever. Strong, easy to set up, durable, and a great investment. So I can wholly endorse this as a fantastic option for anyone who wants a strong, long-lasting tent.